I'll call my dad.
Give me the phone, Annie. You know the rules.
Give me the phone, Annie. You know the rules. Annie stood very still in front of her desk, like the rest of the room didn't exist. I need to text my mom, Annie said. She's sick today. Sarah kept her voice calm. Annie, using a phone during class is against the rules. I wasn't playing, Annie said quickly, her fingers tightening around the phone. My mom texted me this morning and told me to buy medicine for her after school. I just took my phone out to read the message again. I didn't text back yet. I didn't do anything else. There was no attitude in her voice, just worry. Sarah believed her. She could see the worry all over the child's face. Annie, Sarah said gently, I understand, but the rule is still the rule. No phones during class. Annie looked down at the phone again, then back up. I didn't get to text her back. She's waiting for me to answer. The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She knew what it felt like to wait for a message that didn't come, to stare at a phone and wonder if everything was about to get worse. Still, she kept her hand out. You can call your mom from the school office, Sarah said. And you said you wanted to call your dad too, right? You can call him from the office. But right now, I still have to take the phone. Annie didn't move. My dad will fix this, Annie said quietly. He'll tell them I need my phone today. Sarah gave a small, tired smile and nodded slightly. You can call your dad and tell him anything you want. But I'm still the teacher in this room, and the rule is still the rule. So I'm going to hold on to the phone until the end of the day. If you want to call him, I'll send you to the office after reading time. For a moment, Annie just stood there, looking at the phone like she was trying to memorize the message on the screen. Then very slowly, like it was something she didn't want to let go of, she placed the phone in Sarah's hand. Okay, Annie whispered. But I need to call him. You will, Sarah said softly. I promise. She put the phone in her desk drawer and closed it gently. Go sit down, she said. We're starting math. Annie walked back to her seat, but she didn't take out her pencil right away. She just sat there, staring at the clock on the wall. The second hand moved in small, sharp ticks that sounded louder than usual. She finished the math lesson and moved the class into reading time. The room quieted, filled with the soft sound of children whispering words to themselves. When Sarah walked past Annie's desk, she saw Annie wasn't reading. Her book was open, but her eyes were on the clock again. Are you worried about your mom? Sarah asked quietly. Annie nodded. Do you want to go call your dad now? Yes, ma'am, Annie said immediately, like she had been waiting for permission all morning. Sarah walked back to her desk, opened the drawer, and looked down at the phone for a moment before closing the drawer again. She filled out a hall pass and handed it to Annie. Go to the front office, she said. Tell Mrs. Parker I said you can use the phone. Call your dad, and then come straight back to class. Annie took the pass and nodded. Thank you, Miss Mitchell. Annie walked past the rows of lockers, past the bulletin boards covered in construction paper and spelling words, holding the hall pass tightly in one hand. The front office smelled like coffee and printer paper. Mrs. Parker sat behind the desk, reading glasses low on her nose. Well, hello, Annie, she said kindly. What are you doing up here during class? Miss Mitchell said I can use the phone, Annie said, handing her the pass. I need to call my dad. Mrs. Parker read the pass, then nodded and pushed the office phone toward her. Go ahead, honey. Annie picked up the receiver with both hands and carefully dialed the number she knew by heart. The phone rang once, twice. Then a man's voice answered, calm and deep. Hello, Daddy? Annie said. There was a pause, and then his voice changed immediately, softer. Annie? Are you okay? Why are you calling during school? Did something happen to your mom? She's still sick, Annie said, trying to be brave and sound grown-up. She told me to buy medicine after school, but I didn't text her back yet because my teacher took my phone. I took it out in class to read her message again. And it's against the rules, so she took it. She said, I can call you from the office. I'm not in trouble. But I think Mom is waiting for me to answer. On the other end of the line, the man didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was very calm, the kind of calm that made people listen. You did the right thing, he said. You didn't break the rule on purpose, and you told the truth. I'm proud of you. Miss Mitchell said I can call you, Annie continued. I told her you would fix it. There was a very slight pause. Then the man said gently, "Put Mrs. Parker on the phone for a moment, Annie." Annie handed the phone to the secretary. Mrs. Parker listened for about 10 seconds, her expression slowly changing from polite to surprised. "Yes, sir," she said quickly. "Of course, sir. We understand." "Yes, she's right here. I'll take care of it." She handed the phone back to Annie. "Daddy," Annie said. "I'm coming to the school," he said calmly. "Don't worry about your mom. I'll take care of the medicine. You just go back to class and listen to your teacher. I'll be there soon." "Okay," Annie said. "Thank you, Daddy. You did the right thing." He repeated, "I'll see you soon." The line clicked softly. Annie put the phone down, thanked Mrs. Parker, and walked back toward her classroom. Back in her classroom, Sarah Mitchell was helping a student sound out the word beautiful when she heard the door open and saw Annie walk back in quietly and return to her seat. Sarah gave her a small nod. Annie nodded back. Neither of them knew that at that very moment, a black Escalade had just left a downtown parking garage and was on its way to Jefferson Elementary School. The afternoon had just begun when someone knocked on the classroom door. Sarah Mitchell looked up from the worksheet she was handing out. The knock was calm and slow, not like a child knocking, not like a teacher in a hurry. She walked to the door and opened it. Principal Harris stood there, smiling in a way that was a little too formal for a normal school day. "Miss Mitchell," he said, "may we come in for a moment?" "Of course," Sarah said, stepping aside. When the principal walked in, the classroom immediately grew quieter. But it wasn't the principal that made the room fall completely silent a second later. It was the man who walked in behind him. He was tall, wearing a dark suit and a long black coat, the kind of coat that looked expensive without trying to look expensive. His eyes stopped when they found Annie. Annie was already standing. She walked quickly across the room and stopped in front of him. "Hi, Dad," she said. The class went completely silent. The man looked down at her and placed his hand gently on her head. "Hi, Annie," he said. "Did everything go all right today?" Annie nodded. "Yes, but Miss Mitchell took my phone." A few students turned in their seats to look at Sarah. Sarah felt every pair of eyes in the room suddenly on her. The man nodded once, like Annie had just reported something important but not surprising. He looked at Sarah and gave a polite nod. "Good afternoon, Miss Mitchell. I'm William Carter, Annie's father." "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Carter," Sarah said, trying to remain calm and professional. "Annie is a very good student, thank you," he said. Then he gestured lightly toward the desks. "May I ask what happened with the phone?" Sarah nodded. "Of course. During class this morning, Annie took her phone out. School policy doesn't allow phones during class time, so I had to take it and keep it until the end of the day. I told her she could use the office phone if she needed to call home." William Carter listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. "That sounds reasonable," he said. Sarah blinked, slightly surprised by how simple his response was. He turned to Annie. "Did your teacher explain the rule to you?" "Yes," Annie said. "And did you know the rule already?" "Yes, Dad." He nodded again, then held out his hand toward Sarah slightly. "May I see the phone, please?" Sarah walked to her desk, opened the drawer, and took out the small blue phone. She walked back and handed it to him. "Thank you," he said. He looked at the phone for a moment, then handed it back to Annie instead of putting it in his pocket. "Listen carefully," he said to his daughter, his voice still calm but now very clear. "Your teacher was right. Rules at school are important. When you are in Miss Mitchell's classroom, you follow her rules. Do you understand?" Annie nodded immediately. "Yes, Dad. If your mother is sick and you need to contact someone, you tell the teacher first. You don't take the phone out during class without permission. That's not because the rule is more important than your mother. It's because we respect the people who are responsible for us in that moment. And at school, your teacher is responsible. Understood?" "Yes, Dad," Annie said again. He gave a small nod, then turned back to Sarah. "Thank you for enforcing the rule. I appreciate it." Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I'm glad you understand. Annie was worried about her mother, so I told her she could call from the office." "She did," he said. "And you handled it correctly." Principal Harris, who had been standing quietly near the door, finally spoke. Mr. Carter has done a great deal for this school, Miss Mitchell. The new library, the computers, the after-school program, those came from the Carter Foundation. Sarah looked back at William Carter, suddenly understanding why his name sounded familiar earlier. Well, she said, we're very grateful for what you've done for the school. He shook his head slightly. I didn't come here as a donor today, he said. I came as a father. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from, because your story matters too. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story about kindness, justice, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. The room was very quiet when he said that. He looked down at Annie again. Did you finish your lunch? Yes. Did you finish your classwork? Yes. Good, he said. Then you'll stay and finish the rest of the school day like everyone else. Annie nodded. Yes, Dad. He placed his hand lightly on her shoulder for a brief moment, then looked back at Sarah. Thank you for taking care of my daughter, he said. You're welcome, Sarah replied. He gave a polite nod, then turned and walked toward the door with Principal Harris. Just before he stepped out, he paused and looked back at Annie. I'll see you at home tonight, he said. Okay, Dad. Then he left. The door closed softly behind him, and for a few seconds, the classroom was completely silent. Then one student whispered, not very quietly, Annie, your dad is rich. Annie sat down, opened her workbook, and said quietly, he's just my dad. Sarah turned back to the board and picked up her marker. But the room felt different now. Nothing had changed, and yet something had. After William Carter left the classroom, the rest of the afternoon returned to its normal rhythm, but something in the air had changed, not in a dramatic way. The children still worked on their writing sheets, still asked for help spelling words like because and together, still laughed when someone dropped a pencil. But Annie was quieter than usual. She finished her work early and sat with her hands folded on the desk, waiting. She wasn't restless. She wasn't distracted. She was simply waiting, the way children do when they trust that something important has already been taken care of. At 3 p.m., the final bell rang. Parents began arriving outside, the hallway filled with the sound of children talking, lockers closing, teachers reminding students not to run. Sarah stood by the classroom door, as she always did, making sure every child left safely with the right adult or got on the right bus. One by one, the students left. Bye, Miss Mitchell. See you tomorrow. Have a good night. Annie was the last one still sitting at her desk. Aren't you going to the bus? Sarah asked. My dad said he would pick me up today, Annie replied. Sarah nodded. All right, you can wait here with me. Annie packed her books carefully into her backpack, then walked over and stood near the door beside Sarah. She was small enough that her head barely reached Sarah's shoulder. Is your mom going to be okay? Sarah asked. Annie nodded. Dad said he already sent the medicine to the house. He said someone will bring it and make sure Mom takes it. Sarah felt relieved hearing that. That's good. They stood quietly for a few minutes, listening to the hallway slowly grow quieter as more children left the building. Then Annie spoke again. My dad always fixes things, she said simply, but he says rules are still rules. Sarah gave a small smile. Your dad is right. Annie looked up at her. He said I didn't do a bad thing. I just did it the wrong way. That sounds like something a good father would say, Sarah replied. A few minutes later, Sarah saw Principal Harris walking quickly down the hallway toward the classroom. He's here, the principal said, slightly out of breath, like he had walked fast to get there. Mr. Carter is waiting in the front office. Annie's face lit up, but she didn't run. She just nodded and held her backpack straps. I'll walk you, Sarah said. They walked down the hallway together, their footsteps echoing softly in the now quiet school building. The late afternoon sun came through the tall windows, painting long golden rectangles across the floor. When they reached the front office, Annie walked in first. William Carter was standing near the window, speaking quietly on his phone. When he saw Annie, he ended the call immediately and put the phone in his pocket. You ready? He asked. Annie nodded and walked over to him. He looked at Sarah. Thank you for staying with her. You're welcome, Sarah said. She's a very responsible little girl. She has to be, he said quietly. There was a short silence. Then Annie tugged lightly on his sleeve. Dad, can we go see Mom? He looked down at her and nodded. Yes. We're going to the hospital first. Sarah was surprised. The hospital? She's been there since this morning, he said. The doctor wanted to keep her for a few days. Annie didn't look scared when she heard that. She just nodded like she had expected it. Will she be okay? Annie asked. Yes, he said, but she needs rest, and she needs people to take care of her for a while. He looked back at Sarah. Thank you again for this morning. Annie told me exactly what you said to her. Sarah felt slightly embarrassed. I was just doing my job. Yes, he said. You were. He rested his hand lightly on Annie's shoulder and said, Tell your teacher what we talked about. Annie looked at Sarah. Dad said when I'm at school, I listen to my teacher, even if I think I'm right, because teachers are responsible for us when we're here. Sarah nodded slowly. That's a very important lesson, Annie continued. And Dad said if something is wrong, I should tell the teacher first, not try to fix it by myself. Sarah looked at William Carter. You're teaching her the right things. He didn't smile, but his expression softened slightly. Children who try to carry adult problems by themselves grow up too fast, he said. I don't want that for her. Annie slipped her hand into his. And for a brief moment, Sarah saw not a billionaire, not a donor, not an important man, just a father holding his daughter's hand. We should go, he said. Annie waved. Bye, Miss Mitchell. Bye, Annie. I hope your mom feels better soon. Thank you. William Carter nodded politely to Sarah. Then he and Annie walked out of the office together. Through the front windows, Sarah saw a large black SUV waiting at the curb. A man in a suit opened the back door for them. Annie climbed in first, then William followed. The door closed quietly, and the car pulled away from the school. Sarah stood there for a moment, watching the empty street after the car disappeared around the corner. Principal Harris walked up beside her and let out a long breath. You handled that very well, he said. I didn't do anything special, Sarah replied. The principal looked at her, then said, Do you know who he is? He's Annie's father, Sarah said. Principal Harris gave a small, tired smile. Yes, he said, but he's also the man who paid for the new library, the new computers, the teacher training program, and half the scholarships in this district. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. He doesn't come to the school often, the principal continued. But when he does, people listen. Sarah looked down the hallway, now completely quiet, the classrooms empty, the lights humming softly overhead. He came today because of a phone, she said. Principal Harris nodded slowly. No, he said. He came today because of his daughter. Sarah didn't respond, but as she picked up her bag and turned off the classroom lights later that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that the small moment that morning, the phone, the rule, the little girl saying, I'll call my dad, was not the end of something. It was the beginning. The next morning, Jefferson Elementary looked exactly the same as it always did. Yellow school buses, parents in a hurry, children running toward the front doors with backpacks bouncing behind them. Nothing about the building suggested that anything unusual had happened the day before. Sarah Mitchell arrived early, like she always did. She liked the quiet of the classroom before the students came in. The clean desks, the untouched whiteboard, the soft hum of the lights. It was the only time of the day when everything felt calm and predictable. At 7:40 a.m., she heard a car outside. She didn't look up at first. Parents dropped children off every morning. Engines came and went. Doors opened and closed. It was normal, but this engine didn't sound like the others. It was too quiet, too smooth. The kind of quiet that came from expensive engineering, not from an old family car. She walked to the window and looked down at the front of the school. A large black SUV was parked at the curb. It wasn't in the line with the other cars. It was slightly apart, like it didn't belong to the same world as the minivans and sedans with bumper stickers and soccer decals. The rear door opened, and Annie stepped out, holding her backpack with both hands. Then William Carter stepped out after her. He didn't rush. He didn't look around like a visitor trying to find the entrance. He stood beside the car for a moment, adjusting Annie's backpack strap on her shoulder, saying something to her quietly. Annie nodded, then turned and walked toward the school doors. William Carter did not get back into the car right away. He stood there for a moment, watching Annie walk into the building, the way fathers do when they want to make sure their child gets inside safely. Then he looked up. For a brief moment, Sarah had the strange feeling that he knew exactly which classroom window was hers, because his eyes stopped on her window almost immediately. He gave a small, polite nod. Not a wave, just a nod of acknowledgement. Then he got back into the car, and the black SUV pulled away from the curb and disappeared into morning traffic. Sarah stood by the window for a few seconds longer than necessary, then turned back to her classroom and began writing the day's date on the board. At 8:05, Annie walked into the classroom. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," she said. "Good morning, Annie. How is your mom?" "She's still in the hospital," Annie said, "but Dad said she's getting better." "I'm glad to hear that." Annie walked to her desk, took out her books, and sat down. She behaved exactly the same as she always did. Quiet, organized, focused. If someone didn't know better, they would never guess that her father was the man who had walked into the school the day before and changed the way the principal stood, spoke, and breathed. The morning passed normally. Reading, math, spelling, recess. But at 11:15, when the class was working quietly on a writing exercise, there was another knock on the door. Sarah walked to the door and opened it. A man she had never seen before stood there. He was wearing a simple dark jacket, holding a small clipboard. "Yes?" Sarah asked. "Delivery," the man said politely. "For Annie Johnson." Sarah frowned slightly. "A delivery?" "Yes, ma'am. I was told to bring this directly to her classroom." He handed her a small paper bag. It was from a pharmacy. Sarah understood immediately. "Thank you," she said. The man nodded once and left without another word. Sarah walked back to Annie's desk and placed the bag in front of her. "Is this from your dad?" she asked. Annie looked at the bag and nodded. "It's my mom's medicine. Do you need to call and tell her it arrived?" Annie shook her head. "Dad said someone already took it to the hospital. This one is for later." Sarah nodded slowly. She didn't ask any more questions. That afternoon, when school ended, Annie packed her bag and walked to the door again. "Is your dad picking you up today, too?" Sarah asked. "Yes, ma'am." They walked to the front of the school together, and again, the same black SUV was waiting at the curb. This time, William Carter stepped out of the car as soon as he saw them. "Good afternoon, Miss Mitchell," he said politely. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter." Annie walked to him, and he took her backpack from her shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world for a man in a tailored suit to carry a small pink backpack. "Did you finish your homework?" he asked Annie. "Yes." "Did you listen to your teacher?" "Yes." "Good," he said. He then looked at Sarah. "Thank you for helping Annie this morning." "It was no trouble," Sarah replied. "I'm glad her mother is getting treatment." He nodded. "So am I." There was a brief silence. Then he said something that surprised her. "Miss Mitchell, I've made a donation to the school this morning. The principal will probably talk to the teachers about it next week. Part of it is for classroom supplies. If there is anything your class needs, you should request it." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. "That's very generous." "It's practical," he said. "Schools shouldn't have to choose between books and safety." She wasn't sure what he meant by that, but before she could ask, Annie tugged lightly on his sleeve. "Dad, we're going to be late." He gave a small nod. "You're right." He opened the back door for Annie, waited until she climbed in, then closed the door and looked back at Sarah one more time. "Thank you for enforcing the rule about the phone," he said. "Most people would have made an exception. But children need adults who are consistent. It makes the world feel safer for them." Sarah nodded slowly. "I never thought a phone rule would lead to all of this." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "Small decisions often reveal who people really are." He gave a polite nod, got into the car, and the black SUV drove away again. Sarah stood on the front steps of the school for a long time after the car disappeared. Around her, parents were talking, children were laughing, buses were pulling away, and the world looked completely normal. But she had the growing feeling that somewhere, quietly, and without asking her permission, someone had started paying attention to her life, and she didn't yet know whether that was going to be a good thing or a dangerous one. A week passed, and life at Jefferson Elementary returned to something that looked normal on the surface. But Sarah Mitchell began to notice small things. Not big things, not obvious things, small things that were easy to ignore if you wanted to ignore them. On Monday morning, When she left her apartment building, she noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. The engine was off. A man sat inside reading a newspaper. She didn't think much of it at first. People parked on that street all the time. On Tuesday morning, the same car was there again. Different parking spot. Same type of car. Same man. Same newspaper. On Wednesday afternoon, when she left school, she saw a different car parked across from the staff entrance. Another man inside. This one drinking coffee, looking down at his phone. When she walked past, he didn't look at her. Not once. That was what made her notice. Most men looked, even if only for a second, even if only out of habit. But these men never looked at her. Not directly. Not obviously. It was like they were trained not to. By Thursday, she began to feel that strange sensation people get when they don't know if they are imagining something or if their instincts are trying to warn them. On Friday afternoon, she was erasing the board when Annie walked out to her desk after the last student had left. "Miss Mitchell?" Annie said. "Yes? Are you okay?" Sarah turned and looked at her. "Of course. Why?" Annie hesitated, then said quietly, "You look out the window a lot now." Sarah didn't realize she had been doing that. "I guess I've just been tired," she said. Annie nodded slowly, like she was thinking about something very carefully. "My dad says when people look out the window a lot, it means they feel like something is coming." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. "What does your dad do, Annie?" she asked, curious. Annie shrugged slightly. "He works with money and buildings, and people call him when they have big problems." That was probably the most accurate description of a billionaire's job that Sarah had ever heard. "Is your mom still in the hospital?" Sarah asked. "Yes. But Dad says she will come home next week. He hired a nurse to stay with her." Sarah nodded. "That's good." Annie reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made this," she said, placing it on the desk. Sarah opened it. It was a crayon drawing. A small school building, a tall stick figure, a smaller stick figure. The tall one was holding the small one's hand. "Is this you and your dad?" Sarah asked. Annie shook her head. "No. That's you." Sarah looked at the drawing again. "And the small one?" "That's me," Annie said. "You stand at the door every day and make sure everyone gets home safe, so I drew you holding my hand." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. "Thank you, Annie," she said softly. "That's very kind." Annie nodded, then put her backpack on. "My dad says some people protect others because it's their job," Annie said. "And some people do it because it's who they are." Then she walked out of the classroom. Sarah sat down slowly in her chair, still holding the drawing in her hands. Outside the window, across the street, she saw the dark sedan again. The man inside was not reading a newspaper today. He was just sitting there, looking straight ahead, hands on the steering wheel. He didn't look at her. Not once. That night, Sarah left school later than usual. The sun had already gone down, and the parking lot was almost empty. As she walked toward her car, she heard footsteps behind her and felt her body tense automatically before she even turned around. But when she turned, she saw a man in a dark jacket standing several feet away, not too close, not too far. "Miss Mitchell?" he said politely. "Yes? I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Carter asked me to give you this." He held out a small envelope. Sarah didn't take it immediately. "What is it?" "Just information," the man said. "Nothing you are required to do." She slowly took the envelope. "Thank you," the man nodded once. "Have a safe evening, ma'am." Then he turned and walked away toward a black car parked at the far end of the lot. Sarah stood there for a moment, the envelope in her hand, her heart beating faster than it should have been. When she got into her car, she sat there for a full minute before opening it. Inside was a single card. Thick paper, simple, no logo, no decoration. 6 words were written in clean, precise handwriting. "Coffee, tomorrow, 4:15 p.m. I'll be outside." No name, no number, but she knew exactly who it was from. Sarah leaned back in her seat and stared at the card for a long time. Across the parking lot, the black car was still there, engine running, headlights off, waiting. For the first time since all of this had started, Sarah realized something important. Those cars, those men, they were not watching her because she was in trouble. They were watching her because someone had decided that nothing bad was allowed to happen to her anymore. and she didn't yet know why. Sarah Mitchell spent the entire next day pretending the card in her purse did not exist. She taught reading in the morning, math before lunch, writing in the afternoon. She helped tie shoelaces, settled an argument about crayons, and reminded 3 different students that there and there were not the same word. On the outside, it was a completely normal school day. On the inside, she was aware of the time in a way she hadn't been in years. Every time she glanced at the clock, she calculated how many hours were left until 4:15. At 3, the final bell rang. At 3:20, the last student left. At 3:40, she was still sitting at her desk, looking at the stack of papers she wasn't actually reading. At 4:05, she finally stood up, put on her coat, and picked up her bag. At 4:12, she walked out of Jefferson Elementary and down the front steps. The black SUV was already there. It was parked in the same place as always, slightly away from the other cars, like it belonged to a different system of rules. The rear door opened before she reached the bottom step. Sarah stopped walking. Every reasonable instinct she had told her to turn around, go back inside, and pretend she had never received that card. But another part of her, the part that was tired of not understanding what was happening in her own life, kept her moving forward. She walked to the car and stood beside the open door for a moment before getting in. William Carter was already sitting inside. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her without saying anything, like this was something they had done 100 times before. "Thank you," she said, taking the cup. The door closed, and the car began to move. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. "I wasn't sure you would come," he said finally. "I wasn't sure either," she replied. He nodded slightly, like that was an honest answer, and he respected honest answers. "I want to be very clear about something," he said. "You are not in trouble. You are not in danger. And you are not required to accept any help from me." Sarah looked at him. "Then why am I here?" "Because my daughter asked me to help someone," he said simply. She didn't know what to say to that. "She told me you stand at the door every afternoon and make sure every child leaves with the right person," he continued. "She told me you noticed when she was worried about her mother. She told me you treated her like her problems mattered." He paused for a moment, then added, "Children notice who protects them." Sarah looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. It was still too hot to drink. "I was just doing my job," she said quietly. "Yes," he said, "but not everyone does their job the way you do." The car moved through late afternoon traffic, the city passing quietly outside the tinted windows. "Why are there cars near my apartment?" she asked suddenly. "And near the school, and the parking lot." He didn't pretend not to understand what she meant. "They're there to make sure no one bothers you," he said. Her hands tightened slightly around the coffee cup. "That's not a normal thing to say to someone." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She turned to look at him. "Why would anyone bother me?" He was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "good people get hurt simply because no one powerful is paying attention." The words sat heavily in the quiet car. "And now?" she asked. "And now someone is paying attention," he said. She looked out the window for a long moment, watching people walking on the sidewalk, cars stopping at red lights, a man carrying a grocery bag across the street. Ordinary life, ordinary people. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know enough," he replied. She turned back to him. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said calmly, "that I know what kind of teacher you are. I know what kind of child Annie is. And I know that when a good child trusts an adult, I pay attention to that adult." She didn't respond right away. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "Nothing," he said. "People like you don't do things for nothing." He gave a small, almost tired smile. "You're right," he said. "I don't." The car stopped at a red light, and late afternoon sun filled the back seat with warm orange light. "I do it," he said, "because when I was young, there was a teacher who helped me when she didn't have to. And I never forgot that." That was not the answer Sarah expected. "She didn't give me money," he continued. "She didn't solve my problems. She just made sure I had a safe place to be for a few hours every day. And sometimes that is the difference between a child growing up angry at the world and a child growing up believing the world can still be good." The light turned green, and the car moved again. "So this is what you do?" Sarah asked quietly. "You repay old debts to the world?" "Something like that," he said. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then the car pulled over in front of a small coffee shop. The driver stopped the car but did not turn around. You don't have to decide anything today, William Carter said. I just wanted you to understand why there are cars near your apartment. They are not there to watch you. They are there so that no one else does. Sarah looked down at her coffee, then back at him. I don't know how to be part of a world like yours, she said. You don't need to be part of my world, he replied. I'm just making sure the world you already live in is a little safer. She didn't know what to say to that. After a long moment, she said quietly, Thank you. He nodded once, like that was enough. The driver opened the door, and Sarah stepped out onto the sidewalk. She stood there for a moment, then leaned down and looked back into the car. Mr. Carter, she said. Yes? I meant what I said yesterday. Annie is a very good child. You should be proud of her. He looked at his daughter's empty seat beside him for a brief second, then back at Sarah. I am, he said. Then the door closed, and the black car pulled away, leaving Sarah standing on the sidewalk holding a cup of coffee that had finally cooled enough to drink. For the first time in a very long time, she had the strange feeling that someone had stepped into her life not to change it, not to control it, but simply to stand nearby and make sure nothing destroyed it. And she didn't yet know how much that was going to matter. A few days after the coffee meeting, Sarah Mitchell began to notice that Annie smiled more. It wasn't a big change. Annie was never a loud child, never one of the children who ran into class talking about cartoons or birthday parties. But now she seemed lighter somehow, like she wasn't carrying something heavy all the time. On Thursday afternoon, Annie stayed behind again after the last student left. Miss Mitchell? She said. Yes, Annie? My mom is coming home from the hospital tomorrow. That's wonderful news, Sarah said, genuinely happy for her. She must be very excited to see you. Annie nodded. Dad said a nurse will stay with her for a while. And he said I don't have to worry about the medicine anymore. I'm glad, Sarah said. You were very brave helping your mom. Annie thought about that, then said, Dad says kids aren't supposed to be brave about adult problems. He says that's the adult's job. Sarah leaned against her desk slightly. Your dad sounds like a very thoughtful man. Annie shrugged a little. He just thinks a lot. After Annie left, Sarah packed her bag and walked out to the parking lot. She didn't look for the black car anymore, but she knew it was there somewhere. She had stopped feeling watched and had started feeling accompanied. The next day, just after lunch, the school office called her classroom. Miss Mitchell, the secretary said over the phone, there's someone here who would like to speak with you for a few minutes. It's about Annie Johnson. Sarah felt a small wave of concern. Is everything okay? Oh yes, the secretary said quickly. It's Annie's father. He's here to sign some paperwork, and he asked if he could speak with you for a moment if you were available. I can come during my planning period, Sarah said. At 2:15, she walked to the front office. William Carter was standing near the window, reading a document. He looked up when she walked in and nodded politely. Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming. Of course, she said. Is Annie's mother home now? Yes, he said. She came home this morning. That's good news. He nodded once. It is. They stood in a brief, quiet pause before he spoke again. I wanted to tell you something so you understand Annie's situation a little better, he said. Not because you need to do anything. Just so you understand. Sarah listened. Annie's mother and I were never married, he said calmly. We were young. We made decisions that were not very responsible, but Annie was not a mistake. Annie was the one thing we did right. Sarah didn't interrupt. I provide for them, he continued. I always have. But I don't live with them. Annie lives with her mother. I visit almost every day, but I don't live there. He paused for a moment, then added, her mother is a good woman. She works very hard. She didn't ask for help for a long time, even when she needed it. Sarah understood that kind of pride, the kind that makes people struggle alone because they don't want to owe anyone anything. She was very sick before she went to the hospital, he said. Annie was helping more than a child should have to help. That's why the phone was important to her that day. Sarah nodded slowly. She was very worried about her mother. Yes, he said. She loves her very much. There was a short silence. Then Sarah said, she's a very strong little girl. William Carter shook his head slightly. She shouldn't have to be strong yet, he said. She should just be 6. Those words stayed in the air between them for a moment. I wanted to thank you, he said, for not embarrassing her when you took the phone, for listening to her explanation, for letting her call me. Small moments matter to children more than adults realize. I just tried to be fair, Sarah said. Fair is a rare thing, he replied quietly. He then reached into a folder and took out a piece of paper. This is a form for a school trip next month, he said. I'll be out of the country that week. Annie's mother may not be well enough yet to attend. The school requires an adult contact. I listed your name, but only if you are comfortable with that. If not, I will arrange someone else. Sarah was surprised. You want me to be her school contact? Only for that day, he said, because Annie trusts you, and children should see the same adult face when they look for help. Sarah thought for a moment, then nodded. That's fine. I'd be happy to. Thank you, he said. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't make it sound like a big favor. He just said, thank you, like a normal father talking to a teacher. As she turned to leave, he said one more thing. Miss Mitchell? She turned back. Yes? When I was a child, there were two kinds of adults, he said. The ones who saw problems and walked away, and the ones who saw problems and quietly stood nearby in case they were needed. He paused, then said, You are the second kind. Sarah didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and walked back down the hallway toward her classroom. That afternoon, Annie handed in her spelling test and waited by Sarah's desk for a moment. My mom says thank you, Annie said. For what? Sarah asked. For letting me call my dad that day, Annie said. She said sometimes one small decision changes a lot of things. Sarah looked at the little girl standing in front of her and thought about a phone, a rule, a black car, a cup of coffee at 4:15, and a man who had quietly placed guards around her life without ever asking for anything in return. Yes, Sarah said softly. Sometimes it does. The first warm afternoon of the month arrived quietly. The kind of afternoon when children asked to stay outside a little longer and teachers didn't mind saying yes. Sarah Mitchell stood near the edge of the playground with her clipboard, watching her students run across the grass, their voices rising and falling in the bright air. Annie was near the swings, talking to another little girl, her backpack resting against the fence. Everything looked normal. That was why Sarah almost didn't notice him at first. He was standing near the front gate. He wasn't dressed badly. Clean jacket, clean jeans, hands visible, posture calm. If someone didn't know what to look for, they might think he was just another parent waiting to pick up a child early. But Sarah knew him. Her body recognized him before her mind finished processing what she was seeing. Daniel, her boyfriend. He wasn't supposed to be here. Her shoulders tightened slightly, and her grip on the clipboard became firmer. She watched as he spoke to the front office assistant through the gate. His voice calm, polite, the version of himself he showed to other people. I just need to talk to her for 5 minutes, he was saying. That's all. I'm not causing any trouble. The assistant was already reaching for the radio to call the office. Sarah took one step forward automatically, the old instinct telling her to handle it herself, to calm him down before he made a scene. But before she reached the gate, 3 men moved. She hadn't noticed them before. That was the first thing that struck her. One had been sitting on a bench near the playground, reading something on his phone. Another had been standing near the parent volunteer table, holding a coffee cup. The third had been near the parking lot fence, looking like he was waiting for someone. They moved toward the gate at the same time, not fast, not aggressive. Just calm, steady, like they already knew exactly what they were going to do. One of the men reached Daniel first and said something quietly, too low for Sarah to hear. Daniel went completely still. From where she stood, Sarah could see his face change. The calm expression disappeared, replaced by something she had never seen on his face before. Uncertainty. The man said a few more quiet words. Daniel looked past the man for a brief moment, and his eyes met Sarah's across the playground. For a second, she thought he might shout, or push past the gate, or try to cause a scene. Instead, he looked back at the man in front of him and nodded once. Then he turned around and walked away without saying another word. The entire situation lasted less than a minute. The 3 men returned to where they had been before, like nothing had happened. The man with the coffee cup went back to leaning against the fence. The man with the phone returned to the bench. The third walked slowly toward the parking lot. The children kept playing. The assistant lowered her radio, and Sarah stood in the middle of the playground, her heart beating so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. A few minutes later, Annie walked over to her. Miss Mitchell? Annie said. Are you okay? Sarah looked down at her. Yes. Why? You look like when someone almost drops a glass but catches it, Annie said. Sarah almost laughed, even though her hands were still shaking slightly. That's a very specific description, Annie shrugged. Mom drops things a lot when she's tired. Sarah looked toward the front gate again. Daniel was gone. Annie, she said carefully, the men who were standing near the playground, do you know who they are? Annie followed her gaze, then nodded. They work for my dad. Sarah felt her chest tighten slightly. Why are they here? Annie thought about that question for a moment before answering. Dad says sometimes you don't wait for bad things to happen, she said. Sometimes you just make sure they don't happen. Sarah looked back at the playground, at the swings moving back and forth, at the children running in circles, at the ordinary, peaceful afternoon. And she realized something that made her feel both relieved and uneasy at the same time. William Carter had not just placed cars near her apartment. He had placed people between her and anything that might hurt her. That evening, Sarah sat in her car in the school parking lot for a long time before driving home. She kept replaying the scene in her mind. Daniel at the gate, the men walking toward him, the quiet conversation she couldn't hear, the way Daniel had simply turned and left. Daniel was not a man who walked away from anything, unless he was afraid. When she finally drove home, she noticed the dark sedan again, parked across the street from her apartment building. The same man sat inside, hands on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was being watched. She felt like someone was standing guard. When she walked into her apartment, the lights were off and the rooms were quiet. She set her bag down on the kitchen table and stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence. No shouting, no footsteps, no doors slamming, just quiet. She leaned against the counter and closed her eyes for a moment, and she realized something that surprised her. For the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid to be in her own home. And somewhere in the city, a man in a black car had made a decision that she was never going to be afraid again if he could help it. Daniel did not come back to the school after that day, but that didn't mean he disappeared. It just meant he stopped coming where people could see him. For the next few days, Sarah noticed small things again. The kind of small things that didn't mean anything by themselves, but meant something when you put them together. Daniel didn't call. Daniel didn't text. Daniel didn't come home before she did. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. The apartment felt different when he wasn't there. Quieter. But not peaceful quiet. Waiting quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a storm is somewhere far away, but moving closer. On Thursday evening, Sarah was in the kitchen making dinner when she heard the front door open. Daniel walked in, but he didn't look like himself. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He wasn't even drunk. He looked distracted. He took off his jacket slowly, like his mind was somewhere else, and sat down at the table without saying anything. "Do you want dinner?" Sarah asked carefully. He didn't answer right away. After a long moment, he said, "Who is he?" Sarah's hand froze on the plate. "Who is who?" "The man with the black car," Daniel said, his voice low and controlled. "The man who came to the school. The man whose people keep talking to me like they already know everything about my life." Sarah felt her heart begin to beat faster, but she kept her voice calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know?" he said. "That's funny, because apparently he knows everything about me." He reached into his jacket and threw a thick envelope onto the kitchen table. It slid across the surface and stopped in front of her. "Open it," he said. Sarah looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Open it," he repeated. Slowly, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a stack of papers. Printed pages. Tables. Numbers. Addresses. Dates. She looked down at the first page and realized what she was looking at. It was Daniel's life on paper. Every job he had worked. Every loan he had taken. Every credit card. Every unpaid bill. Every debt. Every address he had lived at. Every complaint. Every police report. Every court document. Everything. On the last page, there was a single number printed in bold. Underneath it was one word. Acquired. Sarah looked up at him. "What does this mean?" Daniel's face had gone pale. "It means," he said slowly, "that every person I owe money to now works for him." The room felt very quiet. "He bought my debts," Daniel said. All of them. Every loan, every marker, every payment I owe. All of it now belongs to him. Sarah stared at the papers in her hands. Why would someone do that? She asked quietly. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. Because, Daniel said, now I don't owe 10 different people money. I owe one man, and that man sent 3 of his people to my workplace, to the bar I go to, and to the street outside this building, just to introduce themselves. He sat down heavily in the chair across from her. He invited me to talk, Daniel continued. Not asked. Invited. You know the difference? Sarah didn't answer. It wasn't a threat, Daniel said quietly. That's the worst part. Nobody threatened me. Nobody yelled. Nobody touched me. They just showed me this file, and then they told me there was only one rule. He looked at her. One rule? She asked. Daniel nodded slowly. I am never allowed to come near you again, he said. Not at the school. Not at your apartment. Not on the street. Not anywhere. I am not allowed to call you, text you, or ask anyone about you. Sarah felt like the air had been knocked out of her chest. And if you do, she asked. Daniel looked down at the table. They said if I do, he said quietly. Then the number at the bottom of that page becomes due immediately. All of it. At once. Sarah looked at the bold number again. It was more money than Daniel could make in years. I can't pay that, he said. He knows I can't pay that. The kitchen was completely silent. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Daniel let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. Now, he said, I move out. She didn't speak. I'm not stupid, he continued. I don't know who this guy is exactly, but I know what kind of man buys someone else's entire life just to make a point. He stood up and walked to the bedroom. Sarah heard drawers opening, a suitcase being pulled out, hangers sliding across the closet rod. An hour later, he walked back into the kitchen with a suitcase in one hand and a smaller bag in the other. He stopped near the door, then looked back at her. I don't know what you did, he said, or what you said to him, but whoever that man is, he's not doing this for free. People like him always want something. Sarah didn't answer. Daniel stood there for another second, like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. Then he opened the door and left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Sarah stood alone in the kitchen. The papers still spread across the table, the word acquired, staring up at her like it meant more than just money. For the first time in years, the apartment was completely quiet. No footsteps, no shouting, no doors slamming, just silence. She slowly sat down at the table and looked at the papers again. At the very last page, under the printed number and the word acquired, there was a sentence written in neat, clean handwriting. You don't get to hurt someone and then walk away like nothing happened. Sarah stared at that sentence for a very long time. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or afraid. She only knew one thing for certain. Somewhere in the city, William Carter had drawn a line, and Daniel had just learned that crossing that line was the most expensive mistake of his life. Daniel was gone by the time Sarah woke up the next morning. His side of the closet was half empty. 2 drawers were open, cleared out in a hurry. The bathroom shelf, where his razor used to be, was empty, except for a ring of shaving cream he hadn't wiped away. He had taken what he could carry and left the rest behind. Sarah stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long time, just looking at the space where his things used to be. She expected to feel scared. She expected to feel uncertain, like something worse was about to happen. Instead, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt calm, not happy, not relieved exactly, just calm. Like a loud machine that had been running in the background for years, had suddenly been turned off. She went to work that morning like she always did. Same classroom, same students, same morning routine, but she noticed something almost immediately. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't checking her phone every few minutes. She wasn't thinking about what mood Daniel would be in when she got home. For the first time in years, she spent the entire morning thinking only about her students. At recess, Annie walked beside her across the playground. Miss Mitchell? Annie said. Yes? You look different today. Sarah smiled slightly. Different how? Annie thought for a moment. Like when it stops raining but the ground is still wet. Sarah laughed softly. You have a very interesting way of describing things. Annie shrugged. Dad says I notice things. They stood near the fence and watched the children play. Is your mom feeling better? Sarah asked. Yes. She can walk around the house now. The nurse comes every day. Dad comes every night after work. That's good, Sarah said. Annie looked up at her. Did the bad man go away? Sarah felt her chest tighten slightly. What bad man? The man who came to the gate, Annie said. The one who made you look like when someone almost drops a glass. Sarah hesitated, then said quietly, Yes. He went away. Annie nodded like that was the answer she expected. Dad says some people only understand when a door closes, Annie said. Sarah looked down at her. What does that mean? Annie shrugged again. I don't know. That's just what he says. That afternoon, after school, Sarah was putting papers into her bag when there was a soft knock on the classroom door. She looked up and saw William Carter standing in the doorway. Mr. Carter, she said, surprised. Is Annie okay? She's fine, he said. She's waiting in the car. I wanted to speak with you for a moment, if you have time. Sarah nodded. Of course. He stepped into the classroom and closed the door behind him. The room felt very quiet, with just the two of them standing between the small desks and the colorful posters on the walls. I assume Daniel moved out, he said calmly. Sarah was still not used to how he spoke about things. Direct. No pretending not to know. No pretending things were simpler than they were. Yes, she said. He left last night. He nodded once. Good. She looked at him carefully. You bought his debts. Yes, he said. Why? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Because men like him don't listen to requests. They listen to consequences. Sarah didn't respond immediately. I didn't hurt him, William continued. I didn't threaten him. I didn't touch him. I simply made sure that every path he could use to come back and hurt you was closed. He looked around the classroom for a moment, at the small chairs, the alphabet chart on the wall, the stack of spelling tests on her desk. Some people think power is loud, he said. It isn't. Real power is quiet. Real power is the ability to make a problem disappear without anyone seeing how it happened. Sarah sat down slowly in one of the small chairs, suddenly feeling very tired. I didn't ask you to do this, she said. I know, he replied. I can't repay you, she said. I didn't do it for repayment, he said. She looked up at him. Then why? He thought about the question for a moment before answering. Because I have a daughter, he said. And one day, she will be a woman walking through the world alone, and I hope that if she is ever in trouble, someone will step in and help her even if they don't know her. The classroom was very quiet after that. I didn't save you, he added. You were already surviving. I just removed the man who was making survival necessary. Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. He won't come back, William said, not because he's afraid of me, but because he has no doors left to walk through. Every job he might apply for, every loan he might try to take, every place he might try to move to, all of those doors are closed to him now. She stared at him. That sounds like a lot of power. He met her gaze calmly. It is. There was no arrogance in the way he said it. Just truth. Is that fair? She asked quietly. He considered that question seriously. No, he said. It isn't. That answer surprised her. But what he did to you wasn't fair either, William continued. The world is not a fair place, Miss Mitchell. The best we can do is decide which side of unfair we are going to stand on. She didn't know what to say to that. He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. You don't owe me anything, he said. Not money, not loyalty, not friendship. The only thing I ask is that you continue to be the kind of teacher who notices when a small girl is worried about her mother. He opened the door, then added one more sentence. Because that small moment is the reason all of this happened. Then he left the classroom and walked down the hallway toward the front of the school where the black car was waiting. Sarah sat alone in the tiny classroom chair for a long time after he left, surrounded by spelling words and math worksheets and children's drawings taped to the walls. She thought about a phone, Arul, a little girl who just wanted to text her sick mother, and a man who had quietly closed every door in another man's life just because that man had made her afraid in her own home. For the first time, Sarah understood something important. William Carter had not helped her because she was special. He had helped her because he had decided that what was happening to her was wrong, and he was the kind of man who did not ignore things that were wrong. 3 weeks passed. At first, Sarah Mitchell still checked the locks twice before going to bed. She still jumped a little when her phone buzzed after 9 p.m. She still positioned herself closer to the kitchen door when she cooked, like she needed to know where the exits were. Fear does not disappear in one moment. It leaves slowly, like winter. One day you realize you didn't wear your heavy coat, and you didn't even notice. By the third week, Sarah began to notice small changes. She started cooking again without rushing. She left a book open on the couch because she knew it would still be there when she got home. She stopped looking out the window every time a car door slammed outside. And one evening, she burned the rice. Really burned it. The smell filled the apartment, and the smoke alarm beeped once in protest. Sarah stood in the kitchen, staring at the pot, waiting for the sound of a chair scraping back, waiting for footsteps, waiting for a voice to say her name in that low, dangerous tone she knew too well. Nothing happened. The apartment stayed quiet. She turned off the stove, opened the window, and leaned against the counter, breathing in the cool evening air. Then, to her own surprise, she started crying. Not loud crying, not the kind that comes from panic or pain, quiet crying, the kind that comes when your body realizes something is finally over. She slid down until she was sitting on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, and she laughed once through the tears because she realized how strange it was. She was crying because nothing bad had happened. The next morning at school, Annie walked into the classroom and immediately stopped when she saw Sarah. "You're smiling," Annie said. "Am I?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Annie said. "Not the teacher smile, the real one." Sarah laughed softly. "I didn't know there was a difference." "There is," Annie said seriously. "The teacher smile is polite. The real smile makes your eyes smaller." Sarah sat down at her desk. "You notice everything, don't you?" Annie shrugged. "Dad says I should pay attention to people, not just words." That afternoon, as the students were packing up to go home, Annie stayed behind again. "My mom made cookies," she said, holding out a small plastic container. "She said I should bring some for you." "You don't have to do that," Sarah said. "My mom said I do," Annie replied. "She said you helped me when she couldn't." Sarah took the container. "Then tell your mom thank you. And tell her I said, I'm very happy she's home." "I will," Annie said. She hesitated, then added, "Dad says sometimes the most important people in your life are the ones who were kind to you before they knew who you were." Sarah looked at her carefully. "Your dad says a lot of things." Annie nodded. "He thinks a lot." After Annie left, Sarah sat at her desk for a long time, looking at the container of cookies. On top of the napkin inside, there was a small note written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter when I couldn't. Lisa." Sarah folded the note and put it in her bag. That evening, when she got home, she opened the apartment door and stepped inside slowly, like she was still getting used to the idea that it was truly hers now. No shouting, no tension in the air, no feeling like she had to move quietly to avoid making someone angry. She walked to the kitchen, put the cookies on the table, and looked around the apartment. For the first time, it didn't feel like a place she survived in. It felt like a place she lived in. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she looked at the screen. A message from an unknown number. She stared at it for a moment before opening it. "Are you all right?" That was all it said. No name, no explanation. She didn't need one. She typed back, "Yes, I'm all right. Thank you." 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, another message came. "Good. That's all I wanted." She looked at the phone for a long time after that, then set it down and opened the container of cookies. They were chocolate chip, slightly overbaked, but still warm in the middle. She sat at the kitchen table, eating a cookie in the quiet apartment, and realized something she had not allowed herself to think before. William Carter had not just removed Daniel from her life. He had given her something back. He had given her silence, and she was only just beginning to understand how valuable that was. Daniel Brooks disappeared in the quietest way possible. No dramatic goodbye, no final argument, no broken dishes, no slammed doors. He simply stopped existing in Sarah Mitchell's life. At first, she expected him to come back, not because she wanted him to, but because that was what he always did. He would disappear for a few days, then come back like nothing had happened, like the past could be erased just by pretending it didn't exist. But this time, days turned into weeks, and he didn't come back. The first week, Sarah still felt like she was waiting for something. waiting for a phone call, waiting for a knock on the door, waiting for that familiar voice in the hallway outside the apartment. But nothing happened. The second week, she noticed that she had stopped checking the locks twice. The third week, she realized she had left a glass on the kitchen table overnight, and it was still there in the morning, exactly where she left it. It's strange, the things that tell you your life has changed, not big moments, not dramatic speeches, just a glass of water that stays where you left it. At school, the other teachers began to notice the change in her before she said anything. "You look well rested," one of them said in the staff room. "New haircut?" another asked, even though she hadn't changed her hair. "You're smiling more," the school secretary told her one morning. Sarah didn't know how to explain that she wasn't smiling more because something good had happened. She was smiling more because something bad had stopped happening. One afternoon, about a month after Daniel left, Sarah stayed late to finish grading papers. The school was almost empty, the hallways quiet, the late sunlight stretching long across the classroom floor. She was putting the graded papers into neat stacks when she heard a soft knock on the open classroom door. She looked up and saw Annie standing there with her backpack on. "I thought your dad picked you up already," Sarah said. "He's talking to the principal," Annie said. "He said I could wait here." "Of course," Sarah said. "Come in." Annie sat in the small chair across from Sarah's desk and watched her for a moment. "Miss Mitchell?" Annie said. "Yes? Are you happy now?" The question was so direct that Sarah didn't answer right away. "I think I'm learning how to be," she said finally. Annie nodded slowly, like that made sense to her. "My mom says sometimes when you're safe for a long time, your body doesn't know what to do at first," Annie said. "She said you have to teach yourself that the bad thing is really gone." Sarah looked at the little girl sitting across from her and thought about how much Annie had seen, how much she understood for someone so young. "Your mom sounds very wise," Sarah said. "She cried the first night she came home from the hospital," Annie said. "Not because she was sick, because she said she wasn't scared anymore." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. A few minutes later, William Carter appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to keep you waiting," he said to Annie. "It's okay," Annie replied. "I was talking to Miss Mitchell." He looked at Sarah. "I hope that's all right." "Of course," Sarah said. "She was keeping me company." Annie stood up and walked to him, then took his hand. He looked down at her for a brief moment, and Sarah saw that same expression she had seen before, the one that only appeared when he looked at his daughter, not the expression of a powerful man, the expression of a father. "Say goodbye," he told Annie. "Bye, Miss Mitchell," Annie said. "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow, Annie." Annie walked ahead down the hallway, leaving the two adults standing in the quiet classroom. William Carter didn't speak immediately. He looked around the room, at the drawings on the wall, the spelling words on the board, the small chairs. "He left the state," he said finally. Sarah knew immediately who he meant. "Daniel?" she asked. "Yes." She didn't ask how he knew. She already knew the answer to that question. "He took a job in another city," William continued. "Not a very good job, but a job. He will stay there. He understands the arrangement." Sarah sat down slowly in one of the small chairs again. "Will he come back?" she asked quietly. William shook his head once. "No." He didn't say, "I don't think so." He didn't say, "Probably not." He said no, and she believed him. "You didn't have to tell me," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I thought you should know that chapter of your life is closed." Closed. It was a simple word, but it felt very big. Sarah looked down at her hands for a moment, then said, "I don't know how to thank you for something like this." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Live a peaceful life." "That's enough." She looked up at him. "That doesn't seem like a fair trade." He gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Miss Mitchell, I don't measure everything in money or favors. Some things are measured in whether a child grows up believing the world is cruel or believing the world can be kind." He nodded toward the hallway where Annie had walked out. "My daughter is watching how I treat people," he said. "One day she will choose what kind of people she allows in her life based on what she saw when she was young." He looked back at Sarah. "So I make sure she sees the right things." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears again, but this time she didn't look away. "Then I hope she always sees this version of you," Sarah said quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once, like that was the most honest thing anyone had said to him in a long time. I'll see you tomorrow when I pick Annie up, he said. Okay, Sarah replied. He turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps quiet against the polished floor. Sarah stayed in the classroom for a long time after he left, sitting in one of the tiny chairs, looking at the empty doorway. Daniel was gone, not hiding, not waiting, not coming back. Gone. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to say the words out loud, even though no one was there to hear them. It's over, she whispered, and in the quiet classroom, with the late afternoon sun falling across the desks and the drawings on the wall, she realized that for the first time in years, the future did not feel like something to be afraid of. It felt like something she might actually get to live. It happened slowly, not in one big moment, not in one dramatic morning where Sarah Mitchell woke up and suddenly felt like a different person. It happened in small, almost invisible ways. The first time she noticed was in the grocery store. She was standing in the cereal aisle, comparing two boxes, when she realized she was not rushing. She was not checking the time. She was not worried about getting home before someone else. She was just standing there, deciding which cereal she wanted to buy. It was such a small thing that it almost made her laugh. Freedom, she realized, sometimes looks like standing in a grocery store and taking your time. At school, the changes were small too, but the children noticed everything. Sarah laughed more now. Real laughter, not the polite teacher laugh. She told stories during reading time. She stayed a few extra minutes at recess instead of hurrying the kids back inside. She started a small art corner in the classroom with extra paper and crayons she bought herself. One afternoon, as the class was drawing, Annie walked up to her desk and placed a picture in front of her. It was a drawing of a house. In front of the house were 3 stick figures, one small, 2 tall. Who are these? Sarah asked. Annie pointed. That's me. That's my mom. And that's my dad. Sarah nodded. It's a nice house. Annie looked at the drawing for a moment, then added, Mom says when she gets stronger, we're going to move to a better apartment. Dad said he will help. I think that's a very good plan, Sarah said. Annie pointed to the house again. Mom says a home is not where you are scared. A home is where you can sleep. Sarah felt those words settle somewhere deep inside her. That evening, when Sarah went back to her own apartment, she stood in the doorway for a moment before turning on the light. The apartment looked the same couch, same small kitchen, same table by the window, but it felt different. It felt like a place where she could sleep. She walked to the kitchen, cooked dinner slowly, and ate at the table instead of standing at the counter. After dinner, she left the dishes in the sink and sat on the couch with a book. At some point, she fell asleep with the book still open on her lap, and when she woke up an hour later, her first reaction was not fear. It was confusion about what chapter she had been reading. That was when she realized just how much her life had changed. A week later, the school held a small spring event in the gym. Parents came to see their children's drawings and school projects displayed on the walls. Sarah stood near her class display, talking to parents, smiling, answering questions about reading levels and math homework. She saw Annie walk in with her mother. Lisa Johnson was thinner than Sarah expected, and she moved slowly, but she was smiling. Annie held her hand and guided her carefully through the crowd, like she was the adult, and Lisa was the child. When Lisa reached Sarah, she held out her hand. Miss Mitchell, she said, I've wanted to meet you for a long time. It's very nice to meet you, Sarah said. Thank you for taking care of my daughter, Lisa said. She talks about you every day. Annie is very easy to take care of, Sarah replied. She's a wonderful little girl. Lisa smiled and looked down at Annie. Yes, she said softly. She is. A moment later, William Carter walked into the gym. He didn't make an entrance. He didn't try to draw attention, but people noticed him anyway. Some parents whispered. The principal walked over quickly to greet him. A few teachers straightened their posture without realizing they were doing it, but he didn't look at any of them first. He looked for Annie. When Annie saw him, she ran across the gym and hugged him around the waist. He rested his hand on her head for a moment, then said something quietly to her that made her smile. Then Annie grabbed his hand and pulled him toward Sarah and her mother. Dad, this is my teacher, Annie said, even though he already knew. William Carter nodded politely to Lisa. It's nice to finally meet you. You too, Lisa said. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us. You already have, he said. You raised a good daughter. Lisa looked like she might cry, but she smiled instead. They all stood there for a moment in the noisy gym, surrounded by children's drawings and science projects and paper decorations hanging from the ceiling. It was such an ordinary scene that it almost felt unreal to Sarah. A few months ago, she had been afraid to go home. Now she was standing in a school gym, talking to the mother of one of her students and the father who had quietly changed her life, and everything felt calm, normal, safe. As the evening ended and parents began taking their children home, Annie ran back to Sarah one more time. "Miss Mitchell," she said, "I forgot to show you something." She pulled a folded piece of paper out of her backpack and handed it to her. It was another drawing. This time, it showed a classroom. Small desks. A board. A tall stick figure standing near the door. And a small stick figure standing beside her, holding her hand. At the top of the page, Annie had written in large, careful letters, "Home is where you are not afraid." Sarah looked at the drawing for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it in her bag, because for the first time in many years, she finally understood what that meant. The school year ended quietly. No dramatic final day, no big speeches, just children cleaning out their desks, teachers sending home folders full of drawings and math worksheets, and parents taking pictures of their children in front of the school sign. Sarah Mitchell stood in her classroom after the last student left, looking at the empty desks. The room always felt bigger when the children were gone, too quiet, too still, like a stage after the play is over. She walked slowly between the desks, picking up forgotten pencils, stacking leftover papers, straightening chairs that didn't need to be straightened. She wasn't really cleaning. She was just taking her time. On her desk, there was a small stack of drawings and cards from students. Crayons, stick figures, misspelled words, hearts, smiling suns in the corner of the page. She picked them up one by one, reading each message carefully. "Thank you, Miss Mitchell. Have a good summer. You are the best teacher." Then she saw Annie's drawing at the bottom of the stack. She recognized it immediately before even opening it. Annie always folded her papers very carefully, edges lined up perfectly. Sarah sat down and opened it slowly. It was a drawing of 4 people standing in front of a school. One small figure holding hands with a tall figure. Next to them, another tall figure standing slightly behind, like he wasn't trying to be in the picture but was there anyway. And next to him, another figure with longer hair, standing close to the little one. At the top of the page, Annie had written in big, careful letters, "Some people keep you safe. Some people teach you how not to be afraid." Sarah stared at the drawing for a long time. At the bottom, in smaller letters, Annie had written, "Thank you for both." Sarah folded the drawing carefully and placed it in her bag. When she walked out of the school that afternoon, the parking lot was almost empty. Teachers were already gone, buses had left, and the summer quiet had begun to settle over the building. As she walked down the front steps, she saw the black SUV parked at the curb like it had been on so many afternoons before. Annie was standing beside the car, holding her mother's hand. Lisa looked stronger now, still thin, but standing on her own, smiling in the warm afternoon light. William Carter stood beside them. Annie saw Sarah first and ran toward her. "Miss Mitchell," she said, throwing her arms around her. Sarah hugged her gently. "I'm going to miss you this summer." "I'm still going to read," Annie said seriously. "Dad bought me books." "I'm not surprised," Sarah said, smiling. Lisa walked over more slowly. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "Not just for Annie, for everything." Sarah shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. Annie made my year very easy." Lisa looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "No, you made a very hard year easier for my daughter. That's not a small thing." William Carter walked over then, hands in his pockets, calm as always. "The principal told me Annie will be in your class again next year for advanced reading," he said. "I'm glad," Sarah replied. "She's one of my best readers." Annie looked very proud of that. There was a small, comfortable silence between the 4 of them, the kind of silence that only exists when people no longer feel like strangers. Finally, William said, "Miss Mitchell, I want to tell you something, and then I won't bother you again unless Annie gives me another reason." Sarah smiled slightly. "That sounds fair." He looked at the school building for a moment before speaking. "When Annie called me that day about the phone, she didn't tell me that you took it," he said. "She told me that her teacher said rules matter, but people matter more. and that you let her call me because her mother was sick." Sarah didn't remember saying it exactly like that, but she supposed that was what she had meant. "That told me everything I needed to know," he said. He then looked directly at her and said something she would remember for the rest of her life. "Money can solve problems," he said. "Power can remove danger. But only a certain kind of person can make a child feel safe when their world is falling apart. And that's worth more than anything I could ever donate to a school." Sarah didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. Annie tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad, we're going to be late." He nodded. "You're right." Annie hugged Sarah one more time, then ran back to the car. Lisa followed slowly, and William opened the car door for her before Annie climbed in. Before he got into the car himself, he looked back at Sarah one last time. "No one should be afraid in their own home," he said. "Not if someone has the power to stop it." Then he got into the car, and the black SUV pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. Sarah stood on the front steps of Jefferson Elementary for a long time after the car was gone. In her bag was a drawing from a little girl. In her apartment was silence that no longer felt like waiting for something bad to happen. In her life was a chapter that had closed, and another one that had quietly begun. She turned and walked back into the empty school to finish cleaning her classroom for the summer. On her desk, she placed Annie's drawing where she could see it. "Home is where you are not afraid." And for the first time in many years, Sarah Mitchell finally understood that she was home. The story teaches us that sometimes the most powerful help comes quietly, not loudly. Real protection does not always look like a hero saving the day. Sometimes it looks like someone who simply refuses to let injustice continue. It reminds us that small acts of kindness, like a teacher listening to a child, or an adult taking a problem seriously, can change someone's entire life. The story also shows that true strength is not about power or money, but about choosing to protect those who are weaker and making sure no one has to live in fear in their own home. In the end, the greatest lesson is simple. When you have the ability to help someone who is being treated unfairly, and you choose not to look away, you can change the future for more than just one person. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.